Okay. Uh, I'd like to welcome the Belgian ambassador and his wife. Thank you for coming. And you all here, coming in such numbers. So what we're going to do is going to go as follows. Since we have at least 4 of the 7 living artists here, they can also say something about their work, which I think would be interesting to hear it firsthand. I'm going to say something really general about the show and talk about specific works, of course, and why the show came about and what it actually means to me and what it also probably means to a couple of the artists and to Siba and her Parasol unit. And then then you can go upstairs, because if we're also going to talk already about the works upstairs, because otherwise if we have to meander all the way up with so many people, that's going to be difficult, I think. So, so the gap, why a show about abstraction? When I was asked by Siba to organize a show about painting, I had the idea to make it a little bit more interesting in terms of just showing new painting propositions or find interesting painters, and also to do something with a little touch of a little historical touch, like a mini museum show in a sense. And for a long time, I mean, although I am a painter that works with figuration and with departing from already existing imagery, which is referential and which I rework, that doesn't mean I don't like abstraction. I mean, I've always had a very sweet tooth for people like Mondrian, Ad Reinhardt, Ryman, Ellsworth Kelly, which is actually also a friend of mine. And in that sense, there is a reminiscence. It's just that I think the position of the type of abstraction that I'm showing here is very personified. All the positions are different positions from different point of views, from different artistic practices. If we start with the beginning, you're in front of a piece which is actually made by an artist duo, which is Stefan Schrane and Carla Arrocha, and also Philip van Snick, which is actually the oldest living artist in the show. Both are not, the 3 are not here, which is quite interesting because it's sort of like presence in absence. It's also a work that goes over the 2 floors and was specifically made for this space and this show. What you see is a representation with which the colors were picked by Philip van Snick, who is an artist who's been working with the concept of abstraction, but also night and day. So the space downstairs is day, the space upstairs, which has a somewhat smaller ceiling, is night, in a sense. Then behind me, there is a work from, actually, I think those are the oldest works in the show. It's Gaston Bertrand, I think this is from 62, and the other one is from 54. Gaston Bertrand was not an unknown person in London, because he was also a person who was quite an organizer of abstract shows or works with abstract artists. And there is even, I think you can still find some material in the British Library here in London. What is interesting is that these people, Gaston Bertrand, Jeff Ferrier, which you will see upstairs, or also Amédée Cortier, which is in the beginning, which we can maybe peep around the corner if you'd like, and look at that, are people that, of course, were at the forefront of avant-garde. I mean, they were no strangers to people like Fontana, Manzoni, and also, of course, the Zero Group. Also Walter Leblanc, which is upstairs, clearly having worked from a departure of optical art, and also the reminiscence to the idea a little bit of South American art, if you think of Cruz Diaz and Soto. So all these influences come together, which is interesting because we come from a very small country, but there are a lot of interests and a lot of positions, which is typically Belgium. Belgian people are great as individuals. They're pretty bad as a group. In that sense, there's going to be a nice text which will be written for the catalogue by Ken Pratt, where he says, of course it's abstract because Belgium is abstract. I mean, don't forget Belgium was created in 1830, so it's a very young country. But anyway, that on the side. So all these positions are actually trying to think and look at abstract art from an operational point of view. Like the work of Carla, Stefan, and Van Snick becomes operational because it includes the colors and works with the space, and also the work of, for example, the artists like Raoul de Keyser, because this work is a work from 1971, a freestanding linen box. It's actually it has to do actually with a football field. Raoul de Keyser, during his lifetime, was also a reporter, a sports reporter. And the other works, because that's 71, and the other works of Raoul, the ones you see behind there, are much recent, much more recent. I think that one is from 97, the other one is from 2003. Most of the artists in the show I've known personally, except Gaston Bertrand, Jeff Verheijen, and Amédée Cortier. But all the others I've known personally, talked to them, and had a sort of relationship with. There are also pairings in the show, or at least comparisons. And if you see the work of Raoul, Raoul's work is clearly, and this is actually also for most of the artists, also another artist, and his wife is here, the artist Bernd Lohaus, who made sculptural propositions in the space, which are in the front when you came in, which you saw. Who also works sometimes with text, which is not the case in these works, because they are free compositional positions that you actually can mobilize and put in a certain constellation you would like to put them. They also have an element of abstraction, but they also have an element of the real. And I think what is important for Belgian art is that one should never forget that when one thinks about Belgium, there are two names that always crop up, which is like René Magritte, which is perceived as surrealism, which he was not, and James Ensor, which is perceived as grotesque and out of this world. He was a clear predecessor, of course, of Expressionism, all by his own. So in that sense, one forgets that Belgian art actually deals with the real, with realism. And in that sense, there's an element of concreteness, which you can see in every work in this show. That comes back, and therefore the abstraction is also an expression that's been experienced, and in that sense translates. That is also the case with Raoul de Keyser. I clearly know from fact that we talked, and that we had a relationship that a lot of the abstraction comes from out his visual experience and perception. The same goes for an artist like Geert Robijns, who makes actually, there's one wall behind where you see the coat, and actually goes through the wall, you see a constellation in the corner of objects that come out of the house of his grandparents and are put in a constellation which sort of like displaces them in the space and therefore makes an abstraction from it. So there are clearly different elements. I also think to show abstraction just in a formalistic way would be actually boring. It would not be able to reactivate it. What's also really important, and this is why the title is The Gap, is that we're talking about two different generations. Two different generations who, for sure, people like Gaston Bertrand, and some of them may, of course, know them, of these younger artists, and some do, and others may not, but there was no clear link, in a sense. Now, if you look at the work of Jeff Verheijen upstairs, where you see works from the 70s, and I think one from the 60s, dark painting, which is an element of a dark room. He also made a larger dark painting, which we didn't get from the Museum in Fine Arts in Antwerp, which is a bit bigger, which was made in the 50s, actually the same period of time as Ad Reinhardt made it, from probably different reasons. But if you see the paintings that he makes with dégradés, there is a clear linkage to Peter Vermeers, in a sense, whereas Peter Vermeers and also Jeff Verheijen had a clear definition and a fascination with light. Light and time. Time is also a specific element. I mean, the marble piece of Peter Vermeers, and which is a hard structure on which you have a soft structure, which is the paint as a marker in a sense, and then the very even, nearly perfect surface of what you could perceive as sky or an environmental or atmospheric image of abstraction that goes in several layers, because these layers are minutely painted. This also comes back in a different form, in a form that is even more polished, which is even more about perfection in the work of Boy and Eric Stappaerts. And actually, when we were unpacking this work and hanging it, Boy told me, this is Boy here, that it's clearly based on old masters. That's what you said, right? So that you have the blue for the sky, you have the red for the garments, you have the beige for the color of skin, and why did you have the last ones? Also for the color of the skin, or the contrast. Because one should, of course, not forget we come out of the country of Jan van Eyck, which is the most unforgiving painter of all, and probably the best painter in the Western Hemisphere anyway. So fuck Leonardo da Vinci. So in that sense, this show, and this was the clear departure point. This was also my interest in order to create that situation. There is a beautiful work of Guy Mees upstairs, which also unfortunately died suddenly, which I knew very well because I worked with him at the Rijksacademy in Amsterdam. Beautifully sensitive work that is actually also, to a point, there is an element of sensuality in it, which I think is also yet another point that in this group of works and these artists, and also a specific thing that has to do with my home country, is the element of the physicality of things and the understanding of that physicality within the real. And it's all done with a specific way, a specific attention, and these things are important. Like, for example, also the work of the youngest artist, which is Timothy Zegers, who deals with metal sheets which are put on magnets, which you can move up until the last moment of installation, or the circular forms that are framed upstairs.
They also move, you turn them until they fit in their situation. So I don't see it as an abstraction. When you bring it into life, then you place it, then it becomes a function. So this is real, actually.
Okay. But maybe we'll ask Geert, for example, too, because in front of his work, to just say something, and maybe we're going to make it more dynamic.
Okay. You just described. Maybe we have to see first those two pieces, or what you saw in the entrance space. It is, for one hand, the jacket of my grandfather, and for the other hand, a kind of small jacket of my grandmother. Those two things are like two figures which were important for another project that I'm making now in Belgium. Last year my grandmother went to a rest house, and out of that fact came that the family would sell the property, and I bought her house not only to keep the house close to me, but to make a project out of that. So what I did was that I making a sculpture out of her house, what later will be a residence place for artists. That was one goal, but when we were doing that project, I was cleaning up the house, and while I was cleaning, I selected some elements out of that place to replace into another place. So the idea was that we make, for one hand, a sculpture of the house, and for the other hand, that we put out the elements of like pieces of furniture, pieces of clothes, elements which were still hanging, and to select objects to give the new context. What you see here is like a shelf which is almost falling apart. These are the shoes of my grandfather. There are objects what he made, and what was important in this for these elements is that, for one hand, that they are very specific, and the way how we install it is just a bit above from the ground. So actually, they goes away from the object itself because of the fact that we bring it in another position, but the fact that we just hang them, they become also not directly objects like what we have in daily life that we are standing around. And this is what you see here as an installation out of a large project, actually.
Okay. Maybe, Peter, you can say something about your work, since you're here too.
Well, what we see here is basically two tracks in my practice. One is let's say the painter, the canvas, painting the canvas hanging here. My aim with those paintings is to actually bring together a field of representation and abstraction in one. So that you come into a moment, you come before or into a moment where the image we see here can be seen or can fall into the dimension of representation, but also immediately in the dimension of abstraction. So it can flip both ways, and it has this moment of it can be everything. The way I construct these images is really coming from taking a lot of photographs, snapshots of situations where I take away the let's say the narrative of what is recognizable reality. So I take away angles, I take away things we can directly identify. So then I come to a picture which is manipulated into its negative. So there's a lot of kind of manipulation towards an image which I see as a kind of 0 degree image, where those both kind of sections, representation, abstraction, come together, merge together, and can exist as one. Then we have the marble piece, which is again a kind of answer to my fascination with time-space, because there's no time and there's no space. These are one thing, but it's a complete formal other answer. It's something which is a huge fascination for something which is bigger than us, which is history, time, which goes beyond our thinking. And it's a fragment of it. It's a very small fragment of that kind of dimension, which is in front of us and relates to that dimension. And it's something that I want to bring back, this kind of ungraspable thing, to the moment of here and now again, another time moment. So yeah, these are the two things.
Okay, there's also an artist we didn't talk about, which is Francis Alice, which is quite a very well-known Belgian artist, who up until this point actually didn't really want to be part of a Belgian group show, and now is. Which I think is interesting, maybe because of me, I don't know. But it's just that he is now, and it's also interesting because what also Peter emphasized, and Geert also, and what I also emphasized with this element of the real, of course, is also the case with Francis Alice. In that sense, he's no stranger to where we come from. Literally to the point where it's used, where the abstracted image is actually used as a color chart nearly, in the small paintings, which they have a specific objective as an object on the wall, because they also work with the idea of structuring, the idea of colors and light, but even up until the point where it's directly on a newspaper. And there is also an image where a part of the actuality is sort of blocked off by the situation. I thought that was also quite interesting to have a work like that next to a work like The Panic Room, where Eric maybe and Boy can say, or Boy and Eric can say something about. Talk about The Panic Room.
Okay. I will talk about The Panic Room, also about the paintings. First about the Panic.
The dark room, where you can see, it's an older work, I think it's 10 years old.
10 years old. It's just in the beginning, it's a black space. It's called Sit-in Black Space. And then you have the sculptures, the brain of the panic zone. The idea is that you can sit down and that your eyes adapt to the blackness and that you see black in black. And the walls and everything is like matte and the sculptures are like reflecting, like car spray technique. The idea is that this is an evolution who came out of the panic zone, which is another work of me, which I produced before. It's a very anecdotal situation. My mother died. I made a big circle in a block of clay and then pushed a black hole into it. this is the evolution on the panic zone, which is the middle of this panic zone. But everybody knows the moment when he enters a panic zone, then he has to use all his talents to keep yourself in balance. So it's a very collective item. Everybody has this kind of panic zones and is also mostly able to come out of this. It's like personal treatment. Yeah, the other works. So I have one of those ones upstairs, big blue one. Maybe the people can go a little bit more on the side that everybody can see them. The idea is that in here I have a white line, here I have a black line, here also black line. This is in the layer under this layer, white, black, black. It's called polarization painting, which is a common subject if you put on the television or you come out of your house. Polarization is increasing everywhere. So this is a reflection of the real thing who happens on a political field mostly. I make also a lot of conflict paintings, which where I form groups of color who have a relationship together, which form a conflict position towards the other groups of color. Polarization painting, conflict paintings, noise paintings.
Say something about his work.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult when they're upstairs. So,
I mean, just try to.
yeah, what I try to do with my work is I want to create an object that is more part of life that you're living with, that you would use, like even for saying it, that you would use a suit, you wear a suit to ornament yourself. And for me, it is important that the work is something that's more than it's just something that is framed with an idea or a concept that is real. It is something that we unpacked, we put it on a wall behind us. The upstairs, the metal pieces, if you have seen them, they play with the trompe-l'œil, with the trickery of perspective, and they give you this depth. These are the small ones that I have upstairs, but the bigger ones, they pull a wall in a direction that one wants. And like Luc says, with the magnets, you can turn this around, and you can give this weight within space how you like it. So when sitting in a desk or something, and you have this piece behind you, it will push over you. It will push people. It will give you this force. So it's this unspoken force. It is how we use our language, how we use, even how we agree on value of things. This I want to give it back into people's hand, not as a sort of a cleanness of an artwork that it's only fit to put into a space and that you look at it, but it's as a function. But the moment you take it off a wall, you put it back in a very neatly case, which is very sharp made, like almost like a gun holster or something. It is again something abstract. It is something that is beyond its function. It can be anything. It could be flipped over, turned around next time, and it's another story. It's another use for it. Yeah, this is a bit how I see it.
Great. So you understand my drift, right? In terms with the real, because you heard it from the artists themselves now. Because nothing falls out of thin air. I mean, there is a clear, experienced element that plays out in all these positions, and and also I also want to say a bit more about the position of Guy Mees, which I think is a very underrated artist still so far. There are beautiful pieces you will see, which are pieces from 1965. I mean, very early on, where he has made in layers of lace. There are circular forms in the space, and behind there's a black light. Now he always told me that had to do with indirectly it had to do with his fascination with the red light district. That's what he told me years back. But they're beautiful abstracted pieces. I mean, I've I've showed them for the second time, because I also showed them in another show I curated, the very first one, Trouble Spots painting, which I did with the NICC in collaboration with the Museum of Contemporary Art in 1999, where they were also in the vicinity of Helio Tizika and Gerhard Richter, and this was a sort of experimental research in terms to see what the boundaries are of painting. I mean, in terms of two-dimensional proposition or in terms of a spatial proposition, which is actually a constant sort of fascination I have, because painting, although I'm quite a traditional painter, you could say, painting for me is not only just the painting. It can be several things. A movie can be painterly made. A photograph can have painterly qualities, and even a performance can go as far, because what you're talking about is clearly also nearly an element of performing, taking it from the wall, changing it onto a flat surface and a wall surface, and all these things come together. So these were all the ideas in a nutshell to come to this show, and I'm actually really happy with the show, because on the floor plan it looked smaller once we came here, and this is of course also a problem always with doing an art show. The space was much more generous than we thought. So there was the chance to hang it with even space, with a lot of space, a lot of air between the works, which I actually like, because that also sort of emphasizes and validates every artist in his own right. Also the work of Amédée Cortier, the orange one you see, was for me, for example, a surprise to see that. I mean, if we would hang these works, we also deliberately made the mix so that, for example, the old work of Gaston Bertrand sort of comes into a definite dialogue between Van Snick, Boy, and Raoul, and all those elements. That makes it interesting for me then as a curator, in order to have that experience. In that sense, it's an artist, installed show. It is not a show by an art historian. That is a clear and definite difference. So an artist will always depart from the visual, which I always think is important, which I also think a lot of curators don't do anymore, which is actually a shame, because you can do a visual show with a visual clear understanding and the concept, because why couldn't you? But then again, I don't want to take away the job of a curator. That's a definite, different other proposition. So the experience is actually paramount in those, and I hope that you will enjoy it. Thank you.